All right, so you are joining a class today that is called Flowering Shrubs. We are going to be talking about some of the most common shrubs that we see in most people's landscapes. And we will be talking about some of the questions that I get every year about some of these flowering shrubs, so that hopefully you will be able to manage them a little bit easier in your landscape. So my name is Ashley Bodkins, and I work with the University of Maryland Extension Office in the most western part of Maryland, in Garrett County. So up here in the mountains of Garrett County, we have some pretty unusual weather compared to other parts of the state. So we will be talking a little bit about how your climate affects your shrubs. Unfortunately, over the weekend, I don't know if you guys can see my screen, but we had some pretty nasty weather, some pretty late frost. So this is my oak leaf viburnum. I don't know if you can make it out, but there is some frost damage on there, which is always heartbreaking. But the good thing about a lot of these woody shrubs is that they will they might affect, the frost might affect some of the flowers, but it's not going to affect the overall health of the shrub. So that's always good to know. I wanted to start with this slide to reiterate that University of Maryland Extension is part of the land grant university system with University of Maryland. Every land grant university across the nation has extension services, and they're usually local counties. Here in Maryland, we have 23 local offices in every county, plus one in Baltimore City. So if you have a question related to anything gardening or otherwise, we always encourage you to reach out to your local extension office. They have great information about climate. They can help you with things like 4-H, food, health, and nutrition, financial literacy. There's just a whole wide range of topics that we can help folks with that just is not all about agriculture. Here in Garrett County, I work with the home horticulture side of things, so I answer people's questions related to anything they have related to their landscapes or home gardening. And I also work with the Maryland Master Gardener program. So if anyone's interested in the Master Gardener program, we can tell you a little bit more about that, but it's based on folks that want to do 40 hours of educational outreach in the community, and once they do that and 40 hours of classroom learning, they can be certified as a Maryland Master Gardener. And most every state in the United States has a Master Gardener program. So if you're not from Maryland particularly, which I saw, thanks for everyone participating in our first chat, lots of folks from all around the East Coast that are joining us. So thank you guys all so much for coming in and learning about shrubs with us today. I do see there is one question, how much does the program cost? Here in Garrett County, it only costs $110 to become a Master Gardener, but all around the nation, the price is going to vary. Most programs do require you to purchase the handbook, so it just depends on where you are and that kind of thing, and what that program includes with the training. All right, so moving right along. We are going to start with, what is a shrub? I always like to start every presentation with a definition. So what is a shrub? What makes it a shrub? And one of the things that the definitions that I came across that I really liked was, it's a woody plant. So that means that it's going to be there year after year once you get it established. It's not herbaceous, not herbaceous. It can have one stem or multiple stems, and usually with a shrub, it's going to be shorter, usually less than 13 feet, and this definition says no more than 3 inches in diameter around the stem. So it kind of depends, again, what definition you look at, but it's always going to be a woody plant in your landscape, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So this is another slide that I use in a lot of my different programs, and it's about vertical stratification. So that's a fancy term, but basically the point of this slide is that we want our shrubs to play a really important part in our environment, in our landscape. So if you think about the naturally occurring environment, land wants to be covered. So if it's left fallow, if a field is left fallow for years, what's going to happen? Well, Mother Nature is going to take over and we're going to get these different layers of plants coming up. If you think about forests or trees, you know, if you think about those that have been there for a really long time and you go visit them, it's not like what we see in our yard. You know, a lot of our yards, we have grass, and then we have some really tall trees. But in order to increase habitat and increase the amount of you know, places for critters to live in our yard, which is a lot of times what we want to do, we want to create habitat. We want to think about this vertical stratification and mimicking what we see in nature. So, you know, we're always going to have some trees, some tall trees in our yards and in our landscapes. And then we have some canopy layers. And then we have understory trees where a lot of our short stuff is. And then we have the forest floor. So a lot of the shrubs and things that we're going to talk about would be similar to these understory trees, which are going to provide a whole lot of habitat, again, for birds, for butterflies, for, you know, hummingbirds, and a lot of the different insects that we need to attract some of like the songbirds and things like that that we want to bring into our yard, as well as amphibians and you know, rabbits and some of the other things that we like to see in our yard when they're not being ornery and eating you know, the things that we don't want them to eat. So we're going to talk about how these shrubs can help us build and create habitat. One thing that I always like to encourage people to do with their shrubs and with their plants in general is to think about the bloom time. So if we are going to try to get more people to, sorry, I was looking at the chat and I got distracted, I'm sorry. If we want to, again, increase this habitat and bring more birds and butterflies and insects into our yard and garden, we need to help spread out when we get these different blooms, which a lot of time is going to provide the nectar and pollen that a lot of our pollinator friends need and things like that. So this is just an example of the top picture here. Of the yellow, that's actually witch hazel that actually blooms in the fall of the year, which is something that we don't have a whole lot of stuff happening here in our area. Of course, we have the red bud here in the middle, the red pink flowers, which are going to be some of the earliest flowering shrubs that we have, or flowering trees. We have, of course, American red holly here on the right hand side. And then on top we have an evergreen cedar, which would always be a good addition as well to your landscape. So just think about that whenever you are thinking about shrubs that you may want to add to your yard or your landscape. If we can, again, provide visual interest, it helps us as gardeners to create, you know, a vocal point in our yard, but it can also serve as, you know, food for, again, some of the struggling pollinators that we hear a lot about, and just creating diversity in our landscape. I always include this slide, so if you've joined me for any of the last couple weeks, you've already seen this, but whenever we're talking about perennials, we always want to make sure that you know what is your cold hardiness zone. So how cold does it normally get in your climate? And that's going to be really important to know so that you can make sure that you're not investing in a plant that is going to not make it year after year. You know, a lot of these things can be fairly expensive, so we do want to make sure that if you're making an investment that it can come back year after year. So if you don't know what hardiness zone you are in, you can visit this website, which is sponsored by the United States Department of Agriculture, to figure out your cold hardiness zone. And then you can look for plants that are going to be appropriate for that. Some retailers actually have this information right on their website because they don't want you to invest in a plant that's not going to make it. So that's kind of a nice thing to do. And I just wanted to always caution folks that just because somebody tells you that it's a great plant for your state, that doesn't always mean that you are not some anomaly in your state. So I live up here in Garrett County in the westernmost part of Maryland. So whenever I see things that say, oh, this plant is great for Maryland, I always quiver because I think, well, Maryland could be down here next to the coast where it's an 8A, or it could be here, you know, in the central part of the state where it's a little, you know, a little colder, so 6 to a 7, or it could be up here in the mountains. So I have to be really careful about what I purchase to make sure that it is going to come back season after season. So just be warned with that information. So I'm seeing that we're going to pause here for a second. I see that people are having folks are seeing the not seeing the slides. So let's pause here a minute and see. Some folks I see do see the slides. I can see the slides. So if you cannot see the slides, it could be that you don't have your grid set up correctly. You shouldn't just be seeing me. You should be able to see the slides. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. So it might have to do with your speaker view versus your gallery view. But all right, so you might just have to play around with what view you have Zoom set up in if you are having trouble seeing the slides. Unfortunately, I'm not sure what else to tell you, but hopefully the majority of folks can see them. If you click off of, you might have to exit the meeting and enter back in, some folks are saying. I'm not sure about that. Everyone should have the screen share feature available to them. So, okay, all right, well, I'm sorry if you can't see the slides, I will be sending them out after the presentation as a PDF, so you will have them for your notes. And since we are recording, we will be able to send out the presentation, which will have the slides along with the voice. So, sorry, that's the best I can do. All right, so we are going to talk a lot about pruning throughout this presentation because that is one of the big questions that I get about pruning, not only shrubs, but trees in general. So I just wanted to throw this slide in to begin with as far as where you should make pruning cuts. So this is just the vegetative structure or of a twig, and hopefully everyone can see my mouse as I'm moving it along, but we always want to be sure that when we're pruning, that you're pruning as close as you can to what we call the node or the active growing point on the twig. So for the picture on the left, the twig on the left, you can see there are buds, and then there are all the buds that go down the twig. So you don't want to cut in between the two buds or the growing regions because that area can't grow. Whenever you are doing a pruning cut, you want to cut as close as possible to the next active growing region so that that's where that bud is then going to have the dominance and it'll start to grow. So just don't forget that whenever we do start to talk about pruning. All right. So to start, I would like to do one quick poll with everyone just to get an idea of where we're at. So the first polling question is, I'm most interested in taking this class on flowering shrubs because. So I'm going to launch this poll. If you would, please go ahead and answer that. And we will share this results with everyone here in just a minute. All right. We have 75% of folks who have voted, so just a few more seconds here and we'll share the results with everybody. All right, we'll go ahead and end the polling. So hopefully everyone can see the results. Thanks for everyone that that was able to vote. So it looks like 55% of folks on the call are just interested in wanting to learn more and how to manage them in their landscape. We have a few folks that 41% that do want to add new shrubs. And then we have some master gardeners that are looking for continuing education hours. So thank y'all for participating. That will help me as we go along here to see if I need to tailor the presentation in any certain way. So thank you. All right, so we're going to get into some specific shrubs now. And again, I picked, I think there's 12 or so shrubs on this particular presentation that we're going to talk about. And these are ones that I get a lot of questions about every year with extension. The very first one is going to be hydrangea. So hydrangeas can be a deciduous shrub, so that means they are going to lose their leaves. And depending on what variety you have, there's probably going to be a woody stalk that's left there each season. So that's why we can consider it a shrub. And they can grow anywhere from 4 to 12 feet, again, depending on variety. And we're going to talk specifically about certain varieties here in just a minute. In general, they're pretty easy to grow if you have well-drained, pretty rich soil. They do like a lot of organic matter, so compost is a great thing to add to their soil whenever you are starting out, if you're just planting a new hydrangea. Again, they like that rich, loamy soil, but they don't like to have their feet be soaking wet, so they like some moisture, but not to be sitting in water continuously. So there are several different types of hydrangeas, and they're all a little bit different. The first one of the most common ones that we see, especially if you go to greenhouses or big box stores or something like that, is this bigleaf hydrangea. So the scientific name for it is Hydrangea macrophylla. This is one of the most common ones that we see here in Maryland. And this is going to be the variety that if you want to change the color based on pH, that's going to be this type. So a high pH usually gives you blue flowers, and a soil pH below 6.5 is going to give you pink or red flowers. So that's kind of a fun thing to do. They do prefer morning sun with a little bit of shade. In the afternoon is best. They don't like full sun. They're not going to thrive in that environment. And these hydrangea microphyllas, they're going to bloom on old wood. So you're going to hear a lot in this presentation about old wood versus new wood. So old wood means that they set their flower buds for next year during this season. So this is really important if you have trouble getting your big leaf hydrangea to rebloom season after season. I know that I've been guilty of buying these and thinking, oh, they're going to look so pretty, and then they don't ever bloom again for me. And a lot of it has to do with our environment where I live. It just gets too cold, and a lot of times those flower buds that are set this year for next year get too cold and they die off. So even though the foliage looks beautiful season after season, without a little bit of cover, it's going to be hard to get those blooming every year. So there are two main types of big leaf hydrangea. There are the mophead or snowball cluster, which you see here on the right. There are also known as the hortensias, that variety. There's also the lace cap on the bottom right-hand side. They usually are kind of more flat on top. These can be really useful if you're trying to attract like butterflies that like that nice wide landing zone. Keep that in mind. And then we have some new varieties that have been bred, like the remontant or the remontant. These are also repeat bloomers, so that means they're going to bloom more than once in the season. And I just put some different varieties. Endless Summer, Blushing Bride, and Twist and Shout were some of the varieties that were recommended if you're looking to add some hydrangeas, some big leaf hydrangeas to your garden. So some important things to know about the big leaf, they're also called French hydrangea sometimes, is that you don't really want to do any pruning if you can help it. It's okay to prune out the flowers as they fade, but if you are going to do pruning, you need to do it right after they bloom. So you don't want to do it later in the season, like in the fall of the year, because again, you're going to be cutting off all of next year's blooms. So try to avoid that. And I also put in here just a little bit about plant propagation, because I know everyone's always anxious to learn about how you can get more plants. If you're, very an avid gardener, you always want more plants, at least I do. So if you want to learn about plant propagation, I did stick some really easy ways to learn to do plant propagation. The really easiest one is this one on the right hand side at the top, something called simple layering. So this works really well on some shrubs that we'll cover today, like forsythia, or even things like grapes, something that has kind of a flexible woody stem. If you can just bend that stem down, put a mound of dirt on it and leave it there for a couple months, keep it pretty well moist. And by within 3 to 6 months, you can then come back, cut it off the mother plant, and then you'll dig up a brand new plant that is completely rooted. So that's just an idea. And again, you can do that with like the softwood cuttings in early summer on hydrangeas. And we put some more information. You can also do the layering. So any type of these layering that are shown here in these pictures, you can try. You can also just, if you have really nicely established hydrangeas, you can also dig them up and divide them. So that's an easy way to do it. But again, you want to make sure that they are pretty well established before you try to dig them up. A little bit more about some of the main question that I do get on the big leaf hydrangeas is, why do they not bloom every season? And that, again, the main reason is because the blooms are getting, the flower buds are getting frozen during the winter. So if you're having that issue, try to provide some cover. You can make a burlap screen. You can use mulch. You can pretty much do whatever is easy for you in your situation, but keeping the wind off of them is really a great thing to do to try to get those flower buds to overwinter from season to season. Some of the other problems we see are related to fungal diseases. So Cercospora leaf spot, anthracnose, and powdery mildew are 3 of the most common ones. And I did include some pictures. So if you have issues that look similar to these, again, you can always take pictures and submit to your local extension office, or you can submit them to me. I'm more than happy to take a look at them. Unfortunately, the only thing that you can really do is to make sure that the plants are healthy. So make sure that they are planted in a correct place where they're not going to be stressed, so not full sun. Make sure that soil fertility is good. So again, add some compost each season. And then you can always do things like chemical control with sprays. That we did list some of those here. You can also do organic fungal sprays. So things like neem oil can also help with this type of thing. But just be forewarned that you are going to have to be sure and reapply them whenever we have a lot of rains. So it is a management thing that's doable, but you do have to stay on top of it. Also, make sure that a source of inoculum from season to season for a lot of these fungal diseases are when the leaves fall off. Don't leave them lay right at the base of your plant. Make sure you rake them out of there and put some fresh mulch down so that there's not going to be fungal spores there for next season. The next type of hydrangea is called the smooth hydrangea. Hydrangea arborescens is the scientific name, genus and species. So this is actually a native hydrangea to North American woodlands. So most people on the East Coast would be good with planting this one. This one is not gonna, the color is not gonna be dependent on soil pH. So what you buy is what you're gonna have for the rest of that season or the rest of that plant's life. And this one actually does bloom on new wood. So that's something that's really, really good for those of us that live in a cold climate. So you don't have to worry about having any type of shelter for this one. You don't have to worry about doing those protective structures to keep those buds from dying out, because the spring that this shrub comes up, those little canes, they're going to be where the flower buds are set for that season. So it's very cold hardy. So for me, that's a really big plus. That's something that I look for. And you can actually cut these back almost to 12 inches from the soil line each season. So management is pretty easy. You don't have to worry too much about cutting too much or not enough. They're a pretty easy plant. They do like average medium soil, but again, well-drained and part shade is going to be pretty important. Again, some of the good cultivars that the fact sheets recommended were Annabelle, Grandiflora, Incredible, and Pink, Invincible Ruby. So the pink one here, Invincible, is here at the bottom of your screen, which I just thought was gorgeous. This is one that I've just always loved to see in people's landscapes. I just think it's the most beautiful, beautiful plant there is. And it's called a PG hydrangea. And it's, again, the scientific name is Hydrangea paniculata. And it's actually originally from the Orient. And it's one of the largest hydrangeas that we have. It can reach up to 25 feet in height. So this is quite the specimen plant if you want it to be. It flowers on the current season growth. Again, a good thing if you live in a cool climate. You don't have to worry about any of the buds getting frosted out or being killed. And some of the best cultivars were Barbara, Bridal Veil, Brussels Lace, Chantilly Lace, Grandiflora, and Limelight. Another native hydrangea that you might want to be interested in adding is the oak leaf hydrangea, Hydrangea corcophilia. Foliage is really one of the most spectacular parts of this plant. Sorry about that. Because it changes this deep dark red in the fall of the year. So that's something that's really nice. Again, with this one, it's going to bloom on old wood. So if you have some issues with cold weather, you might want to consider, again, putting it in a place where it's going to be a little more sheltered, or, again, consider if you don't get repeat blooming each season, then you might want to consider building a burlap screen for it, or, mulching it extra heavy, something like that. And the last one was this climbing hydrangea, which, again, isn't going to be really great in Garrett County where we live, but if you're in a more warmer climate, it's something that would be a really neat plant to have, something that I've never seen too often. So it's something that, again, is going to give you those big, beautiful flower clusters, but it'll actually trail all the way up a building or wherever you want it to go. So just something fun you might want to consider if you're looking for a new plant on a trellis or something like that. All right, so moving right along, the next plant we have for you is going to be a forsythia, which I kind of debated about putting this one in here. A lot of people either love or hate this plant. I've found there's not a whole lot of middle ground. But I did want to talk a little bit about pruning it, because I do get some questions every year about that. And I did want to point out that it's it's tolerant of deers, Japanese beetle resistant, and it's kind of a good plant if you're looking for early spring color. Again, here in our area, we don't have a whole lot going on really early in the spring. So for me, forsythia is one of the first true signs that spring has got to be getting closer. It's also a fun one that you can cut off and bring in your home early and force it to bloom. Like, so if you want some fresh cut branches early in the season, you can usually cut them up to 3 to 4 weeks before they're going to bloom naturally outside. So that's kind of something fun project that you can do and have some fresh flowers, in the house. So again, the main season of interest for this forsythia is going to be early in the spring. So, depending on where you are, could be early April or early May. Here in our area, it's usually mid-April to early May that we get them coming out. And the most pretty part of the flower, or the most pretty part of this plant, is going to be the yellow flowers that are just nice, bright, and cheery. once the flowers go away for the season, you're left with, just summer foliage, just green leaves. Not super exciting, but if you take good care of it, it can be, a nice background plant. So this is a picture I found that I really thought was great to illustrate how important it is to know your cold hardiness zone. So the ones on the left, they were not cold hardy. You can see where the snow line was, where they were protected. And the ones on the right, they do have cold hardy variety. So you can see the difference that that makes. So again, I listed some varieties here on the left-hand side that if you're in a cold hardy zone of 3 to 5 that you might want to consider purchasing. Because again, if you're going to have a forsythia, the only reason you're probably going to have it is so that you get those early spring flowers. And if you're losing them each season, that's a real big bummer. I also wanted to list some different cultivars. Again, these were what they considered to be large, so 8 to 10 feet, ones that are going to be around 10 feet or maybe a little bit taller. Just again, we're not going to go through every one of them. Some mid-sized ones are closer to 5 feet, which I think might be more manageable for some folks. And then these smaller, more compact ones are ones that I was really excited about. They stay somewhere around, 2 to 2 feet. So for me, that's something that, you can mix in with some other flowers and, again, give you some really early spring color, but not be overwhelming or overpowering. So it's important to know when you should prune your forsythia. Again, these shrubs are going to be blooming on old wood. So as soon as they've already, in the next few probably weeks, they're going to be starting to set their blooms for next season. So whenever you talk about pruning your forsythia, you want to do it pretty soon. As soon as they've finished flowering for that season is when you want to get out there and start to prune them out so that you don't lose any of your flowers for the following year. They should have a natural kind of fountain appearance, and if they have gone too crazy or they're too thick, it may not be giving you that beautiful natural flowing pattern that they want to give you. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you can prune them out. I like this picture on the bottom. You can see that there's just stems going every which direction. So that's before pruning. And then the picture on the right is what you want it more to look like once you're done. So again, I've written out all the different steps, but you do want to take out, a few of the oldest stems, because the older they get, the less flowers they're going to produce for you. So again, take out the stems from the bottom up. So if you cut them at the bottom, see, how that's going to affect the canopy layer. And again, you want to keep the overall arching appearance, but just kind of thin it out so that it has more room and so that you get more flowers each season. Just some more information about pruning. You always want to take out anything that looks dead, damaged, or diseased anytime you prune any plant. And then the rest of it's just kind of up to you. Again, opening up the center is always a good idea to kind of help with airflow. Getting more air into your plants is a great way to ensure that you're not going to have too much moisture, and it can help eliminate some of those fungal diseases that we see in a lot of different plants. This is a big no-no. I just have a big red X across this picture. You never want to take shearers to a forsythia. Otherwise, you're going to end up with something that looks like this, which is not what a forsythia should look like. Every time you cut a branch on any plant, that just encourages it to grow. So that's why we can manage plants to make them bushier just by cutting them and making them, thicker. But this is definitely not the thing you want to do with a forsythia. Propagation, again, forsythia is one of the really easy plants to take cuttings on. If you've ever have experience with this plant, you may already know that any branch that touches the ground naturally will just go ahead and make you a whole new plant. So take advantage of that. If you do want to share with a friend or family member or start a hedge of your own, there's nothing wrong with that. It would be an exact copy of the parent, so a clone, and that's a form of asexual propagation that you can do really easily in your yard. We do see some problems with forsythia. Sometimes they can be pretty serious, but again, most people don't spend a whole lot of time, pay a whole lot of attention to their forsythia once you get those yellow flowers in the early spring. But there can be some Phytophthora root rot, Botrosphaeria cankers, and pampas gall. So if you think you're having issues with something like that, again, snap a picture and you can email it to me or reach out to your local county extension agent, and they'd be more than happy to help you diagnose the problem and see if they can help you get it back on the road to recovery. The next group of plants I wanted to talk about were rhododendron and azaleas. So I get a lot of questions every year about what is wrong with my rhododendron. And prior to working for Extension, I used to think that rhododendrons and azaleas were some of the best plants that you could put in your garden. But the more I learn about them, the more I see that they're a little bit more particular than some of the other shrubs that you can add. Again, their bloom season is kind of short, so you really need to enjoy the blooms while you have them, because a lot of the season you're just going to have the evergreen leaves. One thing I did want to note was that you can manage your azaleas and rhododendrons exactly like a blueberry, Paris, holly, heather, or other plants that like those really acid organic soils. So a lot of the things that you do, if you want to have beds that include all of these plants that like these acidic soils, it'd be a good idea to mix and match them all together. So the cultivation rhododendrons, they do have some requirements to make them healthy and happy and make you happy as a gardener. They like a pH between 4.5 and 6. They don't like hot afternoon sun, and they really don't like to have their feet wet. So they need to have excellent drainage. So be sure that if you are, going to put rhododendrons around your home, that it's not somewhere that gets a lot of water, like off of the excess water from your eaves, or draining off from your rain gutters. That would not be an appropriate place for your rhododendrons to go. And a lot of times that's exactly where I see rhododendrons being planted, is right by the edges of people's homes. So just think about that. They also prefer shade. They don't like to be in direct sun, especially not all day long. So if you have them in full sun and you say, well, they do just fine there, that's really good, but it can stress them out. So just be sure that you are keeping an eye on them. Best time to plant them is in the fall of the year. If you are going to transplant them or add them to your garden, this gives them a little bit of time to acclimate and get established. So that's a good point. And the one thing about watering them is, again, they have shallow roots, so irrigation can really be helpful. Again, you don't want them to be sitting in water, but several light waterings throughout the week can really benefit them, especially if you are getting them established. So think about that, okay? And if there is going to be a dry spell, don't forget to give them a little extra attention to keep them happy and healthy. All right, so I see several questions coming in here about what about deer-resistant varieties of rhododendron. It just kind of depends. Deer tolerance and deer resistance is kind of hard. It just depends on how hungry they are, because they will eat anything given the chance. So if you're having issues with the deer eating it, there are some pretty good sprays that you can apply. But again, if it's raining, you have to apply them more often. Once they're established, you might not have to worry about it quite as much, but it is a good point. So I recommend that if you are going to try to get an azalea or a rhododendron established, that you do go ahead and put a fence around it. It's not the most sightly thing in your yard, but once the plant gets bigger, then it's going to have a lot better chance at fighting off the deer. I see somebody said, what do you mean by wet feet? Should you plant on a mound? No, I don't necessarily mean that. I just mean that you don't want to be planting in a depressed area or an area that's going to have water laying there continuously. Good questions. And can rhododendrons be planted near walnuts? The answer is definitely no. You can't plant hardly anything near a black walnut tree. They have a compound that comes out to, it's called jugulin, and it's like a toxin to most plants, so that's why you don't see very much competition around walnuts, because they exude this compound, this toxin that keeps plants from growing near them. So definitely keep plants away from your walnut trees. They're just going to struggle the whole time. All right, thank you all for the questions, and I know I probably missed some earlier, and we'll go back to those hydrangea ones here in a minute. All right, so next we have about soil. So if you think about where these rhododendrons grow naturally, it's usually, underneath other larger trees. So again, they're in the canopy layer with a lot of shade naturally. They do like, again, organic soil, so ones that have been amended with compost or that are pretty rich. So think about that if you are going to establish a new rhododendron or azalea. And mulch is always really helpful at keeping soil moisture in. It can help eliminate weed competition and help eliminate how many times you have to water. So think about keeping the mulch on there, not 10 inches thick, 2 to 3 inches is sufficient. And you always want to keep it pulled back away from the stem or trunk of any shrub or tree. You don't want to choke it out, okay? All right, I see another question here. We're going to talk about some issues with rhododendrons. Can you tell me about the leaves curling? And that's a great lead-in to this next couple slides about winter protection. So yeah, they will definitely curl when it gets cold. And a lot of times we'll see winter burn on a lot of our rhododendrons here in our area. And that's usually because they get dried out from the heavy wind. So wind and cold is not their friend. They can take the cold, they can curl, and nothing will, and they can uncurl and be just fine. But when it's sun, wind, and really, really intense cold, that's when we see the most of the black edging come around the edges, the outside edges of them, and sometimes they'll be like a V shape, and that is due to winter burn. Which can be prevented again if you want to build a screen or just keep them off of the windy side of your house. If you can put them on somewhere where they're going to have a windbreak, they're going to be much better off. One of the pieces of advice was also you could use discarded Christmas trees to help protect some of the branches, but I'm not sure how aesthetically pleasing that would be, but it's kind of up to you. All right, just back up here about pruning. The rhododendrons don't require very much pruning other than to deadhead the spent flowers. You want to try to keep those off. You don't want them to be forming seed pods if you can help it. The seed pods are going to steal a lot of the plant's nutrients. So if you can deadhead the flowers and keep them from forming seeds, then you're going to have more positive energy that's going to go into the roots and more into the overall growth of the plant. Okay. Okay. So next shrub we have for you, let me just check the chat here. I can't tell you specific temperatures about when you'll see the leaf curl. Usually it's before we see it here, it's when it's 0 or below, but it's gonna again depend on the variety that you have and what cold hardiness zone it is. So just be sure that if you are purchasing a new one, that it is cold hardy in your area. And then how far from a walnut tree do the toxins travel? So that's a good question. I would say at least to stay away from the canopy. So wherever the furthest reaching branches are, you don't want to plant anything underneath those branches. And if you can go out a little further, that's going to be a good idea too. Okay, so moving right along to lilacs. So this is another one of my favorite flowering shrubs just because of the smell. I wish that we could do some of these classes in person because we could then use some of our other senses other than just visual. We could then smell the lilacs and things like that. So lilacs are non-native plant. They came here from Europe and Asia, and they've been here in America for a long time. So they're guessing somewhere around the mid 1700s. So that's why they're so common. My favorite place to always see lilacs is usually where there's old homesteads. So that seems like every homestead had a lilac planted there. So even if the house is gone, the lilacs are usually still there. There's more than 2,000 different cultivars, so they're a really wide-ranging plant. They can be pink or purple, kind of like a bluish color, or even just white and even yellow. So I've never seen a yellow one in real life, but I'm sure that they're just gorgeous. The main problem that we hear a lot about with lilacs is that they get powdery mildew, which is a fungus, a fungal disease. So I did list some of these varieties that are supposed to be more resistant. Again, the happier the plant is, the happier the gardener is going to be. So if we don't have issues with that coming with powdery mildew, hopefully your garden will be a little bit happier for you. So just something to think about if you're looking for varieties to add. I see somebody else. So if you don't have the resistant varieties, again, a lot of times I've never seen powdery mildew kill a lilac. Sometimes it will, again, be very unsightly. You can prune out any of the leaves that look the worst to you. You can also use fungal sprays. Be sure that fungicides to prevent it. You do want to be sure that if you are giving it any type of water, that you're not doing that in the evening. Always water your plants in the early morning to ensure that the water dries up and that there's not going to be excess water for the fungal spores to live on. Okay. So every year I get some questions about poor blooming. So my lilac, it's just not blooming. What's wrong with it? And the number one answer that I usually end up telling people is that it's usually too shady. And people say, well, it used to bloom when we first moved here. And then we have to say, well, have any trees, now shading it, or did you build your house, and now it shades it? So they really like to be in full sun with well-drained soil. That's where they're going to be happiest. They don't like a lot of nitrogen. They don't like a lot of fertilizer. They're pretty good with soil fertility being pretty low. So the number one thing is, again, full sun and not too much fertilizer. Usually you can do a little bit of what they call restoration pruning. Again, they tend to bloom best on younger branches. So if you have a really old lilac that's been there for 25 years, you probably need to go in and do some different pruning techniques to it. Take out some of the old branches so that you have an opportunity for some new growth to come out. Again, this is going to bloom on old wood. So if you're going to do pruning to your lilac, make sure you do it shortly after you get these flowers for this season. That's all I have about lilacs. If you guys have questions. The next plant I have for you is something called a hardy hibiscus. So this is one that my mom and I actually propagated from seed, and it's just one of my favorite plants. So whether it's considered a shrub, technically I guess could be discussed or argued because it does kind of die back to the ground each year. But it's one of my favorite plants just because it's so showy. And you do have a lot of the canes that are kind of left each season. So hardy hibiscus, I just put some information in here. There's tons of information out there if you want to learn about it. There's more than 300 different species of hibiscus, and it gives you some different history about, where it was first discovered and why it was named what it was. But I just think that they're just some of the most beautiful plants that you can add. And definitely Rose of Sharon, which is in the hibiscus family, is one that most people have as a shrub in their yard. So A very easy shrub to propagate by seed, or any really way. You can again do the layering with the branches, or just it's a really easy shrub to grow. You kind of have to be careful though, because in some places it's considered to be invasive. So just be careful with that. Make sure that you're not, you know, if you can cut the seed pods off so that they're not being spread by birds or by the wind or by the rain, that's something that might be something you should consider. We don't want these to take over, even though they are beautiful plants. All right. So we're going to move on along here. So this is a chart, oops, that comes from research that was done by Dr. Doug Tallamy with University of Delaware. I'm sure if you guys have studied much about any type of woody plants, you've probably heard Dr. Tallamy's name come up, and he's just a great source of information when it comes to native plants. So native plants are ones that, you know, have been here forever, ones that whenever European settlers came and discovered America, that these were the plants that were growing here, not ones that were brought with them. So I just wanted to include this slide. Again, if you're looking for woody plants to add to your garden, this work is all about how many species of Lepidoptera that it'll support, and Lepidoptera would be your butterflies and your moth family. So that's kind of cool information. So again, we're going to talk about some of these in the coming slides, but one of the ones we're going to talk about is the filbert. And we're also going to, but if you could just add one single plant to your yard, if you would add an oak tree, anything in the oak Quercus genus, you could bring up to 532 different species of Lepidoptera, so butterflies and moths. So just kind of fun information, a good lead in. We're going to talk now about some of the native plants that you might want to consider, some native shrubs that you want to add to your garden. The very first one that I wanted to touch on is American holly, Ilex opaquia. So this is a native tree, but you can prune it back to keep it short like a shrub. It's hardy in zones 5 to 9. It'll give you this nice pyramid shape. It's evergreen, deer resistant. So those are things that I love. And it also produces the beautiful red berries if you have a male and a female. So the berries are going to be a source of, again, food for your songbirds and some different types of birds. So if you're looking to add diversity to your landscape, and, you know, animal diversity and plant diversity, American holly is one of my favorites. And it also is one of my favorites to recommend to folks, especially if they don't, if they're considering a rhododendron. Sometimes I push them away from rhododendrons and encourage them to try more of the American holly, just because there tends to be less deer pressure from American holly. They don't seem to browse it because the leaves are pointy, so that's kind of helpful. And of course, because you do get the little flowers if you have a female, and then of course you get the berries too. All right. The next plant that we're going to talk about is the Viburnum. So this is a very huge genus that has more than 150 different species. So I always tell folks that, again, if you're looking for a native plant to add, look at the Viburnum. At least that was my advice up until probably 3 years ago. We have a couple slides in a minute that's about the Viburnum leaf beetle, which is a new exotic invasive pest that is targeting all types of viburnum. So that is a big problem, and it's kind of a reason to maybe shy away from viburnums, but I did want to include them just because they give us such wonderful wildlife habitat. They not only give you spring flowers or midsummer flowers, and they also give you beautiful berries, which again can really help with wildlife food and be a good food source for them. So I just included a lot of information. Again, you're going to get a copy of these slides. We're not going to read through every one of them, but they do make really great shrubs. And they can, there's a viburnum for every need, depending on what size you're looking for, what shape, what color. There's just a whole lot of options here. And a lot of people often confuse them with hydrangeas, or like snowball bushes. So just be forewarned that they are completely different genuses. A lot of times the viburnums do like full sun, but they can even tolerate some shade as well. So I have nothing but full sun, so I'm always excited to find a plant that likes full sun and that will take full sun. Once you get them established, they have very, very low maintenance needs, which again, as a gardener, that's always a plus. The less work we have to do, the better off we are. And this is the viburnum leaf beetle that I was telling you about. So we started seeing it here in our area probably 4 years ago, and it has very distinctive damage to the leaves. It is a beetle, but the majority of the damage is done in the larva form. Here on the bottom right-hand corner are the egg cases that overwinter on the shrubs. So what happens are these eggs hatch out into the larva. The larva do a lot of the damage with eating these holes in the leaves. They crawl down the stem, and then they pupate in the soil. Once they pupate and become an adult, they crawl back up, and then they lay their eggs on the twigs. So one of the treatments that you can try is you can use the sticky traps, like for gypsy moths, and put around the base of your viburnums. And as the larvae are crawling down to pupate, they'll get stuck. And then as the beetles are crawling back up to lay their eggs, they'll get stuck. So that's one way that you can kind of combat some of them. You can also look for the egg cases on your trees and prune them out and get rid of them. So burn them, bag them, just get them away from any of your viburnums. The really sad part about this is we have so many native viburnums that this beetle is also targeting them. So it's potential that it could wipe out some of our really important viburnum species for a lot of our wildlife. All right, next, the next native plant I wanted to tell you about, this is a serviceberry, which is traditionally considered more of a tree, but downy serviceberry is, you can manage it more like a shrub. So again, this is, in our area, one of the first native trees that we see blooming. I grew up on a dairy farm, and my dad always, that was always our thing. We always said whenever the serviceberry starts to bloom, that's when you should be out in your fields planting oats. So that was always our spring kind of, I guess, mantra, or what we always wanted to do is when the serviceberry was blooming, it should be warm enough to start planting some crops outside. So again, a native plant, you will get the early spring flowers that are pretty and white, just absolutely beautiful. And then later in the summer, usually like in June, you also get berries, which are again are a really important source of wildlife food. So if you're looking to add some more habitat to your yard, you might want to consider this downy serviceberry. And then in the fall color, it also gives you a nice bright orange that sometimes we are missing from our landscape, that bright orange color. I also wanted to talk a little bit about elderberry, or Sambucus nigra. That's the scientific name. Again, not a traditional shrub that you're going to probably find at box stores or something like that, but it's one of my favorites, just because it has a wide range of places it can grow. It likes shade, it can grow in sun, it likes high organic soils. It likes moisture, but again, doesn't like to sit in water. So if you have an area like a drainage ditch that gets a lot of water but doesn't sit there, that's a great place to stick him. You get these big, beautiful white flower clusters, which are great for pollinators. We see lots of bees and butterflies on them every season when they come out. And then you also get the fruit. It seems like this year I've seen a lot of information, a lot of different things on social media promoting the benefits of like elderberry syrup for health and things like that. So this is where those Sambucus products come from, or sambucal products is what I see them sold as. They were once considered so common that they were a ditchweed. I don't see them nearly as often as I used to, which is sad. They do spread readily by rhizomes, by layering, and also by suckering. So once you get them established, it's pretty easy to do a screen with them if you want to, screen out a certain area from your landscape you don't want to see every day. They're just a really cool plant that I encourage folks to kind of check out. The other thing is that they are deciduous, so the leaves will fall off and you'll be left with nothing in the winter. But the berries, they're not edible when they're green, only when they are colored, when they're the black color. And they can also be used for dye. So they were one of the early things that early settlers and things like that used to kind of get that deep, dark, purplish, bluish, blackish color. So that's something fun to try. And they also make awesome jams and jellies. It's not something that you can eat raw. They're a little too stringent for that. But again, the flowers are good for pollinators. 48 different species of birds can consume the elderberries. So that's kind of a good thing, I guess, if you want to attract birds, but it's kind of a bad thing if you're hoping to harvest the berries to make something with. So that's kind of fun. I really like elderberries. My dad loves elderberry jelly, so that's something that we grew up doing, was picking elderberries every season, every spring, or every fall. I just wanted to mention, again, some other shrubs that you might want to look into putting into your landscape. This is another native. This is eastern sweet shrub, or Calycanthus floridus. Whether it's native here in Garrett County, there's been some debate, but it's definitely native for the East Coast, from Pennsylvania all the way to Florida and up down to Mississippi. So a lot of places, a lot of folks that are on this call might be interested in checking out this plant. So it gets really cool flowers on it that are very fragrant, and then it gets this bright yellow foliage in the fall of the year. So again, it gives you multiple seasons of interest, which is always nice as a gardener. It also gets these fruit clusters at the fall of the year. So again, visual interest, something for different folks to try to check out. If you are going to prune this plant, you do want to make sure that you prune it directly after flowering, because it's going to set its flowers that season for the following year. And you do want to be careful because it can spread by suckering. So just be careful. You don't want to get too many of them. If you have them suckering coming up, you can always share with a friend or family member. And I just think that it's really easy to transplant, especially in the fall after the roots have come off. There's not a lot of serious pests or insect problems. So again, for me, that's always a big plus if you're looking for a new plant to add. Some of these plants might be kind of hard to find, but again, I see these around almost every old homestead, so I think they were a very popular plant at one point. We see them pretty commonly around our area on old places, old farm homesteads. This is another plant that gets not a whole lot of attention, but it's another native. This is American hazelnut, Corealis americana. Again, it's really cold hardy to zone 3A, so it gives you a whole wide range of places that you can plant it. You can prune it into more of a shrub. It can spread anywhere up to 8 feet, and it stays usually below 10 feet, so it makes it really a pretty good plant to put in a lot of different areas. Full sun to partial shade, it's not real particular. The one thing I love about it is that it does give you the filberts. Again, so if you're trying to attract wildlife, or you want to feed the squirrels or the chipmunks or anything like that, you get these really cool looking seed pods, and then of course the nuts themselves with pretty good fall color. So a plant that's really easy to propagate by, it'll kind of spread as it goes along. You can dig those up and share them or move them around in your landscape. Again, a plant that doesn't get a whole lot of attention, but my mother-in-law has one, and it just seems to do really good for her, and a nice fun plant to try. Oh, you also get the catkins in the spring. I forgot I had this slide in here. So again, something pretty to see something that's going to give your yard visual interest. And it can also be a source of pollen and nectar early in the spring when there's not a whole lot else going on for our pollinator friends. So the last few slides I have for you are just about pruning your trees. So fruit trees in general, you should prune them early spring. We're getting too late now in the season, but before bud break is when you want to prune your fruit trees. It used to be that a lot of guidance and literature said you should do it in the fall of the year, but we've since learned that the closer you can do it to spring when they're going to break their buds and start to come out, the better off you'll be, because then the plant can heal itself and there's less exposure to fungus and things like that that could get in those pruning wounds. So prune them as close to bud break as possible, and you'll be better off instead of waiting and doing it, not this time of year. It's a little too late. Most of the pruning, if other than the ones that we discussed that are going to, a lot of the shrubs that bloom on old wood, you can do when they're dormant. That makes it a little bit easier because you can see the overall structure of the plant when the leaves aren't on, so that can be very, very helpful. And I had some charts in here that I just wanted to include. So trees and shrubs that bloom early in the season on last year's growth, you need to prune those right away. So here's an example on this picture that just makes me shudder, but somebody went in and they used shears or hedge clippers on their lilac too late in the season, so you can see what happened. Everywhere below where they did not prune didn't get any flowers on it, and then everywhere above where they couldn't reach got the flowers. So this is just a nice list. We're not going to read all of them, just for some guidance in case you're curious about when you should prune. Again, shrubs that are primarily grown just for their foliage, you can prune them in the early spring before they grow. You don't have to worry too much about it if you don't care about losing any of your flowers. Summer flowering shrubs, ones that bloom on new growth, they can be pruned in early spring. Again, you just kind of need to know when they set their flowers. And if you look that up, if you have a particular plant that you're interested in learning about, I always tell folks you can do a quick search with a search engine and just put in there, if you put the word extension or EDU or PDF, if you put all those words in with the plant that you want to learn more about, you'll get some really good fact sheets from university sources that have had really good research. So it's a good way to get good information for folks that have questions. All right, and with that, I have one last polling question for you. I'm going to launch the poll. If you would, please go ahead and take this quick poll and let me know what you learned from today's class. All right, just a few more seconds. Give folks, I was just checking out the chat feature. All right, looks like we've had 88% of the folks on the call that voted. I'm going to go ahead and end the polling and share the results. So it looks like a lot of folks have learned some specific care for shrubs, some pruning, a little bit about pests, and then what shrubs they can add to their landscape. So thank you all for answering those questions. I do appreciate it. Stop sharing the results. I just wanted to share These were the fact sheets that I used to put this presentation together. So again, when you get your PDF version, feel free to click on the links and check out any of that information that we put into the PowerPoint presentation. And then last, I'm just going to go over some questions. I see some folks that are writing in, and I'm going to try to answer those. So if you typed a question into the chat, please feel free to stay on the call. If you are on a time restraint and you want to jump off, that's fine. I do thank you for tuning in today. I hope that you did learn a few things about flowering shrubs and how you can manage them better. Again, if you have any questions that we didn't get or that I missed, I'm going to go over all these here in the chat right now. But for those folks that want to jump off, please go ahead and do that. Thanks so much. All right, so one of the first questions we had here is, let's see. Let's get back here to where we started. Says my holly leaves, let's see, where are we gonna start at? So propagating lilacs, I think that's where we let off. Or here I have one question about forsythia. So pour blooming on my forsythia, Central Virginia, and transplanted it 8 years ago. So my biggest thing would be, are you doing any type of pruning? So just be careful that you're not pruning off the blooms. As long as you're pruning them right after they bloom, in the early spring, you shouldn't be hurting them that way. The other thing is that they could be getting frosted. So if it's not a variety that's very frost hardy, the flowers might all be getting killed off by frost. So just, you might want to give it a shelter 1 year and see if you can get it to bloom for you. So put you could do burlap sacks over it to keep the cold off of it and see if that helps with the blooming. You could always give it a little bit of compost. Just check it out and make sure that you don't see any wilting or anything like that that would indicate if I top through a root rot or a fungal disease in that way. All right, propagating lilacs is the next question. So lilacs are really prolific spreaders. So if you have a lilac established and you don't weed eat close up to it, little suckers will come off of the roots that you can dig up and that will be an exact clone of that parent plant. So that's the easiest way that I've found to propagate lilacs. Now let me just tell you, if you're going to dig up those lilacs, it can be a real pain. It's really hard to do because those suckers are coming right off of the roots, and some of those roots are humongous. So I've often known most use a pickaxe to cut through the roots when I'm digging them up, but just digging up the suckers that come off of the roots are the easiest way to propagate them. Hibiscus do like full sun. That's where they're going to thrive. So yes, full sun for hibiscus. Holly tree leaves are turning yellow. That first thing I would say is either they're getting too much moisture. How old are the hollies? The other thing could be is that the pH is wrong. pH needs to be really low, less than 6 for a holly to thrive. So you could get a soil test to check that, or add some sulfur or some hollytone type products to your trees, around the base of your trees, and see if that helps. You could also look for leaf spots, so any diseases that might be fungal related. If you want to submit some pictures to me, my email is at the beginning of the presentation, Kathy. Please feel free to do that too, and we can look into it. All right, some questions on how to claim Master Gardener Hour credits. It depends on where you're at. For me, in my county, I give you an hour of credit for every hour of learning. So if you want to email me, Mel, about getting credit, or letting your coordinator know that you took the class, let me know, and we can confirm that you did. Carol asked, what counties are the viburnum leaf beetles in so far? I'm not sure if you're in Maryland. I think that they've been found in every county in Maryland, but we can check that out for you. I can look that up and let you know. If you're not in Maryland, please let me know what state you're in. It's not too late, Stephanie, to plant elderberries. They will do just fine. I've actually propagated them from seed before, from a native plant. seed source. So if you can get them and grow them from seed, that's the cheapest way to get them established. Elderberries do like more than one variety, so usually they recommend planting two species, two species together to get the best flowering and fruit production. Yes, Carol says elderberries spread a lot by suckering. That's definitely true if they're happy. She said in her rain garden, so just be forewarned that they're not a good plant for a container, and they will spread. So if you don't want them to spread, make sure you cut them off. Sweet shrub, it is sometimes called spice bush. And for your hazelnuts, Tony, I'm not sure if there has to be a female and a male. I think that they have both male and females on the same plants. I don't think I've ever seen this is a male hazelnut or this is a female hazelnut established. So I think that they must have male and female flowers on each shrub. Yes, hazelnuts are safe for humans to eat, definitely. Okay, Brenda wants to know when to move her Wigelia. Brenda, I'm going to have to follow up with you on that one. I don't know the answer to that. But I will follow up with you after the call, or if you want to send me an email, I will get you an answer for that. Thank you about the natives. All right. All right, well, I don't see any other questions, so thank you all so much for the compliments, and I really do appreciate it. If I missed any of the questions, here's one: pruning rhododendrons and azaleas. Just trim off the dead growth, not the tops. That's correct, Roxanne. Okay, a request for ground cover, seminar on ground cover. I'll look into that. Thank you, Sharon. And yes, I will definitely, here's a question on propagating pussy willow branches. They try to propagate them in water, Mary Beth. So water is not always the best way to propagate woody things. I just recommend putting them right in soil. And if you've had issues with it before, you can always try a little bit of rooting hormone on there. That might help some. Rooting hormone, and then make sure you keep the soil nice and moist. All right, Judith says I should take an axe to the roots of my lilac to split them up, only if they're getting suckers. So that might have been a little confusing to folks, but yeah, if you're trying to dig up a sucker off of your lilac root, and I wouldn't do like all 10 of them, I would just pick one that's the healthiest to do. But yeah, the roots can be really hard to dig through. That's just what I found out. So don't take an axe to everything, but yeah, if you're having issues digging it with a shovel, you might have to get creative. All right. One question about hydrangea, doesn't seem to be getting any larger. Planted them 2 years ago. I would say that they must not be happy, so maybe they're not getting enough shade or they're not getting enough nutrients. So you might want to check on adding some compost to them, and if they're getting too much sun, you might want to try moving them. Okay. Elderberries poisonous to dogs and goats. Sharon, I'm not sure about that. I know that green berries are definitely poisonous to people too, so you don't want to consume any of the elderberries unless they are fully ripe. I can follow up with you, Sharon. I'm not sure about the dogs and goat thing. We can check that out. One question about how do you deflower, take the buds off of a rhododendron and an azalea. Once they have bloomed, you can just use hand pruners and just kind of snap them back. You'll see where you'll be able to tell if you look at one of your rhododendrons that's already bloomed, you'll be able to cut it right back to where the leaves kind of start to come out. All right. Well, I had one question about what's my email. So let me see if I can get my email back up here for you. I'll put it back up. It was on the very first slide. So if anybody needs to follow up with me, my email is here in blue, and I can actually put it into the chat for anybody who might need it too. But it's just abachtl@umd.edu. So, all right, with that, I thank you all for attending. I will stick it here, send chat to everyone. Here we go. There's my email if anybody wants that. Again, I thank y'all for staying on, and we look forward. Next week we are doing one on herbs, so if you're interested in that, be sure to sign up. Thanks so much. Y'all have a great day. Enjoy the sun.